Philosophy begins with a deceptively simple impulse, the refusal to accept the obvious too quickly. The word itself comes from ancient Greek and means love of wisdom, but philosophy is not just collecting wise sayings or admiring clever ideas. It is a disciplined attempt to examine the deepest questions humans ask: what exists? What can we know? How should we live? What makes an argument good? What is the mind? What gives anything value? Unlike ordinary curiosity, philosophy keeps turning the question back on itself. It asks not only what we believe, but why we believe it, what assumptions support it, and whether those assumptions can survive careful criticism. That is why philosophy can feel unsettling. It takes familiar things, such as truth, justice, consciousness, or freedom, and makes them strange enough to investigate. One reason philosophy is difficult to define is that it is not limited to a single subject matter. Physics studies matter and energy. Biology studies living systems. History studies the human past. Philosophy studies the foundations, meanings, and limits behind many kinds of inquiry. It asks what counts as evidence, what makes an explanation satisfying, whether moral judgments can be true, and whether language can fully capture reality. This makes philosophy both broad and reflective. It does not simply add more information to a pile of facts. It examines the structure of thinking itself. A scientist may ask how memory works. A philosopher may ask what personal identity means if memory changes over time. A lawyer may ask what the law says. A philosopher may ask what justice requires when law and morality disagree. Historically, philosophy was not separate from science in the way it often is today. Many disciplines that now have their own departments once grew inside philosophical inquiry. Early thinkers investigated nature, motion, perception, politics, mathematics, and the soul without drawing the modern boundaries between physics, psychology, ethics, and logic. Over time, some questions became measurable enough to form independent sciences. Astronomy, physics, biology, psychology, and economics developed specialized methods, instruments, and professional communities. But philosophy did not become obsolete when this happened. Instead, it remained concerned with the questions that sit beneath and around specialized knowledge. What is a scientific law? What is a mind? Can statistics alone guide public policy? What ethical limits should research obey? Philosophy often works at the edges where facts, interpretation, and values meet. Different philosophical traditions developed in different cultural worlds, and each emphasized different problems. Western philosophy is often traced to ancient Greece, where thinkers questioned mythic explanations and developed forms of argument about nature, politics, virtue, and knowledge. Arabic and Persian philosophy became a major intellectual tradition, especially around the relationship between reason and revelation, how human rational inquiry relates to religious truth, scripture, and divine knowledge. Indian philosophy explored reality, consciousness, liberation, suffering, and reliable means of knowledge, often connecting metaphysical questions with spiritual transformation. Chinese philosophy focused strongly on practical life, social harmony, government, ritual, self-cultivation, and the conduct that makes human communities stable and humane. These traditions are not identical, but they share a common seriousness about fundamental questions. A major branch of philosophy is epistemology, the study of knowledge. At first, knowledge seems simple. If you know something, it is true and you believe it. But philosophy quickly complicates that picture. How do we distinguish knowledge from lucky guessing? What makes a source trustworthy? Are our senses reliable, or can they mislead us? Can reason discover truths that experience cannot? Epistemology matters because every claim depends on some standard of knowing. When people argue about science, politics, religion, or personal experience, they often disagree not only about facts but about what counts as proof. Philosophy gives us tools to examine those standards. It asks whether certainty is possible, whether doubt has limits, and how responsible belief differs from mere opinion. Ethics is another central branch, and it asks what we ought to do. This sounds practical, but the deeper question is surprisingly hard. Is an action right because it produces good consequences, because it follows a duty, because it expresses virtue, or because it respects human dignity? Ethics examines moral principles, but it also investigates moral disagreement. Why do sincere people reach different conclusions about justice, punishment, wealth, freedom, loyalty, or care? Ethical thinking is not just about making lists of rules. It is about understanding the reasons behind moral judgments and testing whether those reasons are consistent. When a society debates privacy, war, medical choices, business responsibility, or artificial intelligence, it is already doing ethics, whether it uses philosophical vocabulary or not. Logic studies correct reasoning. It asks how good arguments can be separated from bad ones, even when the bad ones sound persuasive. A logical argument is not just a loud opinion or a confident conclusion. It has structure. Claims support other claims. Premises lead, or fail to lead, toward conclusions. Logic helps reveal hidden gaps, a conclusion that does not follow, a false dilemma, a circular argument, a vague term, or an emotional appeal disguised as proof. This is why logic is foundational for philosophy, mathematics, law, science, and public debate. It does not tell us which values to hold, but it helps us reason more carefully about whatever we do hold. In a world flooded with information, logic is a defense against confusion. Metaphysics examines the most general features of reality. It asks what exists and what it means for anything to exist. Are objects simply bundles of properties? What makes a person the same person over time? Is time something that flows, or is it a structure in which events are ordered? Do minds exist in the same way bodies do? Are possibilities real in any sense, or only useful ways of speaking? These questions can sound abstract, but they shape how we think about identity, responsibility, consciousness, and the universe. Metaphysics becomes especially important when ordinary categories break down. A digital copy, a transplanted memory, a quantum event, or an artificial mind can force us to ask what kind of thing we are dealing with. Beyond the four major branches, philosophy spreads into many specialized fields. Aesthetics asks what beauty is and why art matters. Philosophy of language studies meaning, reference, interpretation, and how words connect to the world. Philosophy of mind investigates consciousness, thought, perception, and personal experience. Philosophy of religion examines arguments about God, faith, evil, and spiritual knowledge. Philosophy of science studies explanation, evidence, models, and the limits of scientific methods. Political philosophy asks what power is legitimate, what freedom requires, and what justice demands from institutions. These subfields show that philosophy is not a museum of old questions. It is a flexible method of inquiry that follows fundamental problems wherever they appear, from poetry to physics, from courts to classrooms. Philosophers use several methods, and none of them is merely guessing. One common method is conceptual analysis, taking an idea such as knowledge, freedom, or fairness and asking what it really involves. Another is the thought experiment, where an imagined scenario tests our intuitions. If a machine could perfectly imitate human conversation, would it understand? If two people swapped memories, who would be who? Philosophers also examine ordinary language, because everyday words often carry hidden assumptions. They describe experience carefully, especially in areas like consciousness and perception. And they practice critical questioning, pressing every answer for reasons. The point is not to destroy belief for its own sake. The point is to make belief clearer, stronger, and more honest. Philosophy is deeply connected to other fields because every field depends on concepts, methods, and values. In science, philosophy asks what explanation means and how models relate to reality. In business, it raises questions about responsibility, fairness, profit, and human well-being. In law, it investigates rights, punishment, authority, and interpretation. In journalism, it matters for truth, objectivity, public interest, and the ethics of persuasion. In mathematics, it asks whether numbers are discovered, invented, or something else entirely. Philosophy does not replace technical expertise, but it adds perspective. It helps specialists notice the assumptions guiding their work. It also helps the public understand that many disputes are not only technical. They are also conceptual, ethical, and political. The value of philosophy is not that it gives quick answers to every problem. Often, it does the opposite, it slows us down. But that slowing down can be powerful. Philosophy teaches us to ask better questions, define our terms, recognize weak arguments, understand rival viewpoints, and see the difference between evidence, interpretation, and value. It also reminds us that human life cannot be reduced to efficiency or information. We still need to ask what is worth wanting, what is fair, what is real, what is meaningful, and what kind of people we should become. In that sense, philosophy is not just an academic subject. It is a habit of disciplined reflection. It is the art of refusing to live on autopilot. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.